Guys, thank you very much for attending today. Perhaps by way of introduction, for people who don't know you or your business or your institution, could you maybe outline to our audience exactly what your involvement in women's football entails, or even football in general? Christine.
I'll kick off. Chris Yates from NAB. NAB's quite well known across the country, grassroots organisation across many sports, most importantly kicking off with AFL probably back 2002 and soccer 2005. With both codes for a very long time, really working across many levels, and of course supporting the Women's League last year in AFL, and of course the Matildas and the W League here in soccer as well from 2015. So grassroots all the way through to the national teams.
Councillor Thain.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I was born in Scotland, so football's almost...
Where's your accent? Where's the accent gone?
Well, I never knew any other sport till I was 9, so I did come here very young, and my accent went quite quickly. But, you know, the great thing about Australia is it gives you the opportunity to learn other sports as well, but you never forget your first love, which is football. Played it when I was young, and we have, the W League Wanderers team based in Warrington. We have 14,500 people play in the PM district each week. 4,500 of them are women, and it's growing. We have a woman general manager of the association and a woman president. So, you know, we really do support equality out of Penrith, and it was a no-brainer for us to have the Matildas play there.
Who's your team in Scotland?
Aberdeen.
Long
the Dons supporter.
The Dons, Sir Alex Ferguson's old club many years ago. Dr. Keith Parry from the University of Western Sydney, good to see you.
So personally, you can tell from I still have my accent, hopefully. So yeah, I'm from the UK, and I'm a long-suffering Liverpool fan. So there's interesting.
That's not a Scouse accent.
Near enough. When you're 6 years old, an hour away is as good as 10 minutes away. So I'm not far down the road. And that was the time we were actually winning things. So I'm personally interested in football. The university is a supporter of football. We tend to support many codes, but we see the connection with football with the Western Sydney region, and in particular the Wanderers, an institution that means an awful lot to the region, and the same happening with the university. So we've invested in the Wanderers, and particularly in the W League side. We're proud to be the official shirt sponsor across the front of the shirts. That always looks fantastic. And we also sort of advocate for women's sport in general, and look at the way that the sport and education can improve the lives of girls and women across the region.
You say you're an hour outside Liverpool? Which town?
Shrewsbury Town.
Shrewsbury?
Shrewsbury Town.
You know they have their own club.
They're doing currently top of League One, the highest league position in about 25 years.
You should be a Shrewsbury Town fan. Let's move on from that. See, it's within me, it's my passion. I can't, particularly as I'm from Manchester, when everybody says I'm a Liverpool fan, it gets to you. Let's move on. Let's talk about women in football. Christine, being part of the community through sport is an easy connector, isn't it? I suppose for businesses, for institutions, it helps you connect in a very straightforward way with the community. How has that helped in your business?
Well, when I think about NAB, NAB is a very grassroots organisation. We were talking earlier on the little video, but we grow up from small business, and small business is the biggest employer across the country. Huge participation with women in small business. We are a grassroots organisation, so there should be it's seamless between the company and the community. We have the biggest agri-bank in the country, so the big regional reach across the country. So we're out there everywhere, and I think that's just a perfect segue, for sport. And it's just a natural connector, and it's part of our employee value proposition. Our employees are really proud of what NAB does in their local communities, and when it comes to Australia and sport, that's probably the most dominant community connector. So it's very, very natural for us. I must declare I'm the daughter of an immigrant from George Best country, if that gives me a remote qualification.
I think anybody who knows me in this room will tell you that probably doesn't, because I'm a Manchester City fan, so that's the wrong side of the divide. And older people will know that Tony Book always had George Best in his pocket anyway. Anybody know Tony Book? Blank faces. Come on, Ricardo, you must know. John, as you've mentioned, the Matildas in Penrith tomorrow, a sold-out Pepper Stadium. You said to me during a phone call earlier on in the week, I knew it would sell out. Now, is that just the benefit of hindsight, or did you genuinely believe that because of the region's strong connection to female sport in particular, for people who don't know, it's not just football that Penrith produces really great female athletes. Jessica Fox, I think, the Olympic kayaker, she's from Penrith. There are many, many other examples. So this is a real thing for Penrith, isn't it? It's to get behind women's sport. So maybe that's why you were so confident that it would always sell out.
Yeah, well, we support the Sydney Thunder, the women's Big Bash team as well. So, look, I had no doubt, Simon, and say that honestly, truthfully. We just thought that it was a no-brainer, and we sponsored it before the Champions Cup. So, you know, we just knew that it would be a sellout just from the association, the number of players that we have playing each week, and the number of women that we have playing. And for us, it was a great opportunity for those young girls to actually see their idols play in the city, and the city's abuzz at the moment.
What other things have you got on tomorrow? Have you got any other celebrations around the Matildas game?
Well, the Matildas, we had a civic reception for them last night,
Yep.
and they give about 50 young girls the opportunity to come and meet their idols, you know, in the flesh, and it was just the room was buzz. I think the Matildas really felt the love, you know, and it was just a really exciting evening. And I got to meet, fanboy got to meet Sam Kerr. So.
Sam Kerr is the name on everybody's lips at the moment. It's great, isn't it? She's, as rightly pointed out in the previous panel, one of the biggest names in Australian sport at the moment in terms of female sport, not just football. Keith, obviously, as you mentioned, the university sponsors the Western Sydney Wanderers W League through the front of shirt sponsors. I know that you're very keen on the sociology of sport, the culture of sport, particularly football. And again, just harking back to that conversation that we had on the phone earlier on the week, you came up with something that I thought, you know, I've never actually thought of that. You said, why is it called the W League when the A League is not the M League? Is that something significant in your opinion, that it sort of undervalues female sport and female football?
In a word, yes. It's something we call gender marking. I mean, you look at it across, it's not just football, it's not just across the W League, A League, it's across most sports. And I think I said the only sport, the only country that I can get it right, and it's not often I say this, is the US. They have the US men's national team and the US women's national team. They don't distinguish between the two. But if you look across most sports, we call it football, we call it cricket, and then we call it women's cricket. And so that marker says, well, it's not quite the same thing, it's not the real deal. And it goes back to the historical roots that it was mainly men who played sport originally. And women were, in some cases, shunned, in other cases, not allowed to play at all. So, yeah, there's a long-standing historical cause behind it. But, yeah, it's something that perhaps does need addressing. It should be on an equal footage. So if we're going to mark one as being for a particular gender, then we need to mark the other one as well. Otherwise, it's just football.
I think many people have made that point already today and yesterday, that it should just be football, not men's and women's. The other thing I'd like to pick up on that I know that the University of Western Sydney are involved in is a mentoring program for footballers. In particular, I want to relate to, I don't know, people who were here yesterday, Sarah Walsh talked very emotionally about the journey of becoming an ex-footballer, transitioning out of the game. And I know that you're involved, your institution is with a mentoring program to try and help female footballers in particular with not just transitions out of the game, but careers when they're still actively playing the game. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the case for many players that they come to the end of the career and is what to do next. In the UK, it used to be the case that ex-players became either pub landlords or postmen. So they go and deliver posts because that's what they were fit for. Whereas now it's important that we look at education beyond it. Players are increasingly recognising that their education is important. We've got a number of players, some from the Wanderers, from the W League side, who study at the university. And across a couple of sports, we do advocate for that, and it's looking at the career outside. Raising aspirations, as I said earlier, so it's not just being an athlete. We're raising aspirations for all young girls, that education can change lives. and that's something we should be looking at, is put in higher aspirations there for girls and boys. That it doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what your background is, you can change things. You can go on to great things, and the university certainly tells that story. We've got people from refugee backgrounds who go on to world renowned in a number of things that they do. So we're keen to support that development, keen to advocate for it, to encourage. Within the university, if you look at the number or the percentage of women in terms of leadership positions, we're pushing for equality across the board on it, across the university. And so it's that type of mentoring from women in leadership positions and in senior positions that can help with young girls coming through, to raise your aspirations, to support them along the way, to overcome the barriers that are there still for women in the workplace and in sport in particular.
A question for all three of you. I'm fascinated to know your views on this. I assume that if you're a business like NAB, or if you're an institution, educational or otherwise, when you look to get involved with the sports, there's a discussion about the values and what the sport represents. Now, obviously in football, we're very proud of our inclusion, our multiculturalism, our global reach, all the things I would imagine are attractive for sponsors, commercial sponsors in particular. When things happen, such as there's diving on the field, or something makes the newspapers in terms of football hooliganism, which is always a big thing in Australia when something happens, does that impact upon you, and does that worry you as your brand that's being attached to this sport? I'm interested to know how that dynamic works, both good and bad. Kristen?
I can't think of there being a conversation internally about that. There probably has. But if I think about the grassroots, the grassroots is a big theme. Currently, particularly soccer, the co-ed nature, we're talking about the schools with all the round balls, the basketball and the soccer have got a wonderful opportunity for the boys and the girls, and that brings more of a family thing for the game, which I think is a big shift if we go back from 20 years ago. So it doesn't, I think what attaches is our efforts around the community as distinct from being linked to a particular player event, which happens every now and again in different codes.
Look, I think it does, and I think that's why we're choosing who we sponsor as well. Because at the end of the day, for us, it's ratepayers' money that we're using to sponsor teams as well. So we've got to be very careful of that. But and in commercial terms, we've got to have a look and see what the city gets out of it as well. And a lot of the time, you'll take some commercial interest about hotel nights, number of people that are coming in, the money that will be spent on the city in the day. And so something like Sydney Thunder, the Bash, and particularly the Matildas was a no-brainer. We thought we'd get far more from our sponsorship coming back to us than we actually outlaid. So it was quite easy. But we are particular who we do sponsor as well. I'd actually like to put in a claim for 2023. I'd love the Matildas to be based at Penrith.
There we go. Where's the commercial guys?
We've already proved that we can, and I wouldn't expect them to play in Penrith, but it'd be great if they could train there as well and they made that their base. That would be terrific.
There we go. We got the first bit in. Dr. Parry?
Oh, I've got to be careful how I answer this one for a couple of reasons. One is I don't make the decisions, sadly. They don't pay me enough to make those decisions on who we support. One of the decisions with supporting the Wanderers, I think our Chancellor, Professor Peter Shergold, is an avid football fan. He comes from Portsmouth in the UK and is now one of the biggest Wanderers fans. You can see him around the place in the Wanderers games, often in all his gear. But we do look for that synergy between the brands, look for their passion for the region, look for their support for the community, look for their investments in it and so on. Then when things go wrong, that's difficult because we had an incident last year, or this year it was rather, where something did happen at a game and there were some talks around the continued support of a particular club, who I won't name. And I think it is one of those things that you need to be aware that when you're involved with sports, passions are high. And there are players on the pitch and there are people in the stands that will do dumb things at times, let's be honest. There's passion about it, and so you need to go into it with expectations or perhaps an awareness that it can happen. You look at some of the things that the fans do, and it's difficult for a club to control their fans, so things can happen in the stadiums. And players often will do things that perhaps they shouldn't have done. So, yeah, as long as the organisation is aware that there may be some things that come about during the sponsorship, and if there are mechanisms in place, and if the club deals with it appropriately, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But yeah, people need to be aware that sport is huge business, and it's in the public spotlight. If we were sponsoring another field, a cultural field or something like that, and the CEO of a club or of an organisation or a person who was going to a museum, say, did something wrong, it wouldn't make the newspapers. But sport matters so much in this country that anything the fans do, the players do, the CEO or anyone at the organisation does, makes the newspapers, because people are so passionate about it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You invest in the area that people are passionate and interested about, but at the same time you're going to be under scrutiny as well for your association with it.
Just to broaden that out a little bit, I suppose one of the points I'm driving at, well, I first arrived in Australia 15 years ago, and there was an awful lot of cultural resistance towards football, an awful lot. Now that still exists in pockets. You know, I remember when I first arrived in Australia, I would quite regularly hear the term wogball used, which for an Englishman, I'm sure you'll appreciate this, is, you know, it's quite a shocking word because its meaning is a little bit different in the UK, but that seems to have dissipated over time, and I suppose the evidence of that is institutions and companies like yourself are now involved very heavily with the game. The question I'm driving at is, do you feel as though football has got away from that and we've finally broken those barriers down in terms of the cultural resistance from mainstream Australia, or do you feel it's still there bubbling along underneath the surface? It's a tough question, but I'm interested in your answers.
I'll kick off just with I think it's a very, I think it has changed, but I think the interesting thing that's happening around the world is the mums making choices of where their boys are going to play. It's a big thing globally. And there's this care factor about what does that mean long term, and soccer's just holding, my understanding, very strongly globally in that space. So I think that's really interesting, and I think the kids are much more global now, and I think there's you know, the second and third generations are very Aussie now and can stand up proudly. So there's a lot going on. So I think it's dissipated, and I think Aussies, what we love the most really is we love seeing the green and the gold. And this is what soccer can do that other codes can't do. And this is it's going to keep driving, I think, very positively. So I think it's a big movement and a long way to go. And some of those might be few people with big voices still exist. I think it's changed a lot.
I don't think it's completely broken down, but it's certainly a long, long way on its way. I mean, I'm a member of the Wanderers, go and see them whenever I can. If you go to a Wanderers game, it's like a League of Nations. There's people from all over the place, and it's just such a great atmosphere to go and watch a Wanderers game. I think, you know, the barriers of the old ethnic teams have really broken down, and I think the A-League and the W League have gone a long way to making that change over the last couple of years.
I'll comment on two things. One, your earlier mention of the round balls. I think football and basketball are great examples, and their, dare I use the word, dominance across the world is probably down to the ease that you can play them. I mean, you need a ball and yourself to play basketball, and even football, you can go and do keepy-ups and things. Cricket, many other sports, you can't do that in the same way. So I think there's something about the sport that means it has global appeal for being able to be picked up and used. In terms of football's acceptance in Australia, I get myself in trouble when I talk about this sometimes, because I think there's a lot of underlying reasons behind why it's not accepted, and I think it's still a long way to go. I mean, the title of Johnny Warren's book, Sheila's Wogs and Pufters, I think says it all. Football for a long time was seen as not being masculine enough for Australia. And Australia is still one of the great bastions of masculinity. Coming from the UK, it does hit you when you come across it. I don't know if you found the same, but the pure testosterone that fills the country is quite startling at times. And it goes back through, we can trace it back to the origins, and there's lots of explanations. But I mean, Australians like their sports men, and it's still men is the accepted the sport. They like them to be tough, they like them to be masculine, and they will test them physically and they'll test them mentally. And if you don't fit up to those ideals, then your masculinity is questioned. So you look at sports like rugby league, and they are celebrated because it is rough, tough, and brutal. A few years ago, Sam Burgess had his face smashed in the first minute of the game. He had to have a metal plate put in his face. He can't remember anything about that match. And yet he celebrated and was given the keys to the city for playing through the pain. I mean, that's just stupidity. I mean, we're celebrating someone who put his life at risk for playing a sport. And seriously, come on, that's not good. We should be saying, look, he needs to get off the pitch, he needs to get treated. But no, we celebrate that. He's honoured because he played through it, because he's tough. And in essence, he was being, well, although he's British, he was kind of accepted as being a proper Aussie bloke, wasn't he? So yeah, there's a long way to go, I think, before it is accepted. There's still this notion that it is not a true Australian sport. And the one that leads the way in that, the clue's in the title really, Australian football. And that has long links back to Australianness and these early connotations of what it means with certainly with some racial connotations in there as well.
I'm sure you'd appreciate this story. When I first arrived in Australia, of course I had to ship all my stuff over on the boat, and I arrived in Australia after 3 weeks. And of course, being a football journalist, football commentator as I am, as the guys came to unload the stuff into my flat in Mossman, where I then lived, the guy was unloading an awful lot of football books, and he looked at them and went, "Geez, mate, you got a lot of soccer books?" And I said, "Oh yeah, it's my job. I'm a football commentator." He went, "Going for puffs." And that was probably my first introduction. So I didn't tell him that if I wanted his opinion, I would pay extra for it. But anyway.
I don't think that's uncommon. I think
Yeah.
it's a fairly typical response.
Yeah.
I'd never seen a rugby ball until I come to Australia.
I think you have now. Okay, that's the end of my questions. We've got about 10 minutes to go before we break for morning tea. Anybody got any questions for our panel? It's been fascinating listening to them. Stick your hand up, please, or forever hold your peace. Come on, somebody must have a question. There we go. Yes, sir.
Just Keith, I've done work with you about heroes and what that means, and we've talked about from female to male, male to female. I'm interested now that Sam's broken through a lot of the barriers and become a really big name. How do we work with the female heroes as we move forward?
Well, the first thing, they need to be visible, so making sure they are visible. Heroes is interesting. If you ask a guy who's their hero, in a sporting sense, you won't see a female name come up generally across the board. If you ask a woman who's their sporting hero, 50% still will pick a male figure. Generally because we don't see the female heroes out there, don't get enough exposure. So they need to be talked about, they need to be celebrated. We need to recognise that their exploits are excellent. They're up there on the par with the males. And we need to look at the narratives that are around heroes, and this is into the boring sort of academic stuff here, that the narratives around heroes in Australia, surprise, surprise, are male. All the mainly celebrated ones are these really masculine stereotypes that go back to the early foundation myths. And that's the same, to be honest, across many Western societies. So we need to identify female role models, we need to tell their stories. We need to get their profiles out there, and we need to identify what it is that people associate with those. We need to find the underlying narratives about heroism in male and female sense, and work out how to tell those stories, what connects with people. So to tell the stories is one thing, and you also need to understand the audience. You need to understand the people you're telling it to, so what resonates for them, and then tap into that and tell those stories. So yeah, as we've said before, it's all about the story you tell. So understand who your athlete is and tell the right story.
Can I say that, and it's a great question, if Sam Kerr was a bloke, she would have media on the front page of every newspaper and be on TV every minute at the moment as a Footballer of the Year, up for Footballer of the Year. She is a phenomenal player. And I think we need to acknowledge it, that they are heroes first. And I think the other important thing is that the Matildas play more at home. They play more at home, and they play in different areas around the country, and they give more young girls and more people exposure to their team, because I think that's what will really build it.
Just a quick follow-up. There was a great advert on TV in the US, go back 10, 15 years ago, for the WNBA. And there was images of the typical guy playing basketball, probably about as good as I am, so not very good. And then they had the WNBA players who were amazing. And the tagline at the end said, WNBA, they're better than you. And I think we need to get past that image of female athletes. I mean, these are elite athletes who are better than I won't say everyone in the room because I can see some of them in here, but they're better than the vast majority. So we do need to recognise, yeah, exactly as Sean said, that these are elite and very amazing athletes.
It's very clever. Yes, sorry.
If I can just bring this back to grassroots, to district associations and community clubs, and a question for the Mayor. One of our closest or most important strategic partners are local councils. You're the guys that provide the major facility we need, which are the pitches. And it's not just match day pitches, it's pitches for training and access to lights. So from that, a few questions. How do we get more field space? And I know that's very limited, but I think if the sport's going to grow, we need more. How do we get more appropriate or proportionate access? And I'm talking there about, I see the allocations where the ratio of participations in the community or participants in the community doesn't reflect the allocation of the oval. You know, we lose out with thousands of soccer or football players losing out to some local frisbee club. Also, the amount of time across the year. The football season is shrinking in terms of a lot of council allocations, and it's not shrinking for other sports, it's shrinking for grass growing time. And I'd love to hear from a council's point of view how we improve that.
It's a good question, Simon, but we've worked very closely with the association, particularly the Nabean Association, and what they need for the future. And in fact, we've just allocated some new fields for them next year at Jordan Springs as their sport grows. Real estate's always very tight, so it's always trying to accommodate, I guess, the other sports, you know, as well as football. But I think we really work, particularly from Penrith Council's view, that we work really, really closely with the Nabean Association to make sure that their needs are catered for, not just for the current year, but into the future as well. And I guess it's the opportunity for council as greenfield sites open as well, is that, you know, we make sure that we have that green space. There are a couple of things that we're working on at the moment in particular areas that come online that will give a lot of extra sporting fields, particularly in the Kingsway and Gibb Street, which probably means nothing to you, but they're actually allocated for sport as well as they come online in the next 4 or 5 years.
Quick follow-up question. Sure. Is there an opportunity for greater discourse or discussion between councils, Football New South Wales, state government? I always find that those conversations are very disjointed to improve the pie for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we talk to Soccer New South Wales as well as the association on a regular basis as well for what they need for the future. Going to put another claim in here too. You know, everyone, or I'm not sure, but you've heard probably of the third city, and people are talking about the third city, Parramatta, Sydney, Parramatta being the central city. This third city that's supposed to be based around the airport, it's not actually a city, it's a region. And I think it'd be great that if there was a museum of football, that it was in that region.
It's too big to put it today.
I mean, if FFA actually moved out to Western Sydney, I think that'd be great as well, because you're going to have 3 million plus people living in Western Sydney, and it would be great to have a sport based there as well. But I think all we can do is work with the state and the associations to get the best outcome that we can for our players, because as I said before, there's 14,500 people that play in the P. That's growing every year. That's grown from about 12,500 over the last 3 years. And there is more women coming in the sport as well, so we've got to make sure that they're accommodated. And our fields are used extensively over the weekend. It's a real battle for space.
I think the back page of the Penrith paper has been written tomorrow. So World Cup Bid City and Football Museum. We've got time for one more question.
As sponsors, do you think football capitalises on the saleability of the professionals that play it as much? You know, with other codes you have the risk of sex, drug, alcohol scandals, where you don't seem to get that with footballers, professionals.
Oh, maybe you don't get it because it's not covered enough. I mean, if you look at footballers across the world, I mean, they're doing all sorts of things. In Australia, yeah, and maybe again some of it comes down to a lack of coverage. But yeah, there's tends to be a cleaner lifestyle from footballers. So yeah, it could be a way to push it. That you're going to get less scandals if you support a football team. There's a brave marketing pitch for someone.
Apart from Mitch Nichols, who was allegedly caught in having a snort of some things, but who happened to be a Wanderers player at the time as well, so that was quite disappointing. But I think the focus is more on teams at the moment, and you know, I think as the sport grows, particularly the A-League and the W leagues, there probably will be more focus on the players, but it seems to be the focus on the team rather than, which is probably not a bad thing, rather than just one or two people.
I think also, just speaking as a media person and going back to Dr. Parry's point, that it's a lot of that, the coverage, you know, you see Sam Burgess with his face smashed in, or somebody's going out taking drugs, it's almost seen as part of that blokey culture. That's certainly my experience in the Australian media as well. They sort of it washes over the people in the media, and we try and sell positive stories which don't really always make for sexy headlines, unfortunately. But I think it's a good point, well made. I think there's a lot of good points made there in that panel. Fascinating stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Christine, John,